Hey, sup, what up? I'm Silver, by the way. So, a while ago on my Instagram, I made a poll asking my followers which type of tutorial they would like to see. And they voted a rendering tutorial. They voted, and of course I deliver, so welcome to Silver's rendering tutorial. If you'd like to see more tutorials, then make sure to leave a comment down below of whatever type of tutorial you're looking for. I would probably make a video on it if I'm able to. I will still be making tutorials even without any suggestions made, but you know, just leave a suggestion if you have a specific type of tutorial you're looking for. With that being said, want to render like this? Then stick around to the end of the video. I'll be going over each step in its own sections of this video, and every section will have its own explanations. Once again, before we actually get into the tutorial, I'll be posting a lot more drawing and Sonic related content here. So if that sounds interesting to you, then make sure to like and subscribe. Now that I'm done with that, don't forget to pause and take notes if you need to. I like to take notes if I get confused on something, so I suggest you do it too. But anyways, now let's actually get into the video. The art program I'll be using for this is Ibis Paint X, which is actually the free version. I did not pay for Ibis Paint, by the way. I'll probably get to that one day. But anyway, I will also be using an iPad Pro and an Apple Pencil to draw. And yes, my brushes actually also have pen pressure, which means the harder you press your pencil to the screen, the more ink will come out, or in this case, the thicker the line will be. Here's the QR codes for the brushes. They'll also be linked at the end of my video. And also, before I ever finish a drawing, I always add it to Procreate and then add certain things to it, like chromatic aberration and extra liquefying. So I will not just be using Ibis Paint, but you can only use Ibis Paint if you feel the need to, or if you don't have Procreate. This is just extra steps I like to do, and they're actually not necessary. Nor do they affect the tutorial or how the drawing will come out. There will be a total of 4 necessary sections in this video. Anything else is based off of personal preference or things I like to do that may not apply to everyone else's style. So first we'll be doing base colors, the next thing we'll be doing is shading. After that, I like to color line art and then add extra midtones and extra colors to my piece. So this is my rough sketch. This is used as a guideline or visual idea of where things would go. You don't always need this if you have a reference, but if there's something that confuses you in the reference, then you most likely want to have a reference sketch, or what I actually usually call, as I said earlier, a guideline or visual idea of where you would put things. If I have a sketch and did not do line art, I usually clean up my sketch before coloring or doing base colors. What this means is if you ever see anything in your sketch that you think the fill tool would not really be able to understand, or you find confusing if you were to be the one hand coloring it, then you might want to erase some of those parts and redraw it, just to make sure it's a little easier to read. Now it is time to actually do base colors, and as said earlier, you will want your sketch or line art done before you do this. How I like to make sure my sketch is ready for this part is by erasing parts I know the fill tool wouldn't work on very well. So like if I drew sketch lines to indicate shadows, I tend to erase it at this point. This is why I clean up my sketch before doing this. When I do line art, I sometimes like to do base colors when I've got the sketch down and then do it again after finishing the line art. This is so I already have an idea of what color adjustments I want to make or any extra things I want to add to the colors before I fully start going into the entire piece. In some of my more recent pieces, I've kind of gotten a little lazy and I've been using my sketch without doing line art in the final product. So this isn't exactly always necessary, but this kind of just makes stuff easier. I don't know, it's just fun. So for base colors, the first thing I like to do is add a bright color inside of the lines. Usually a color that fits with the character I'm drawing so it isn't too out of place or jarring when you're drawing it. I have once drawn Sonic using green for my base color, and it made me think of Scourge and it made me confused. So I accidentally finished the entire drawing and made it look like Skirt. And if you're wondering why I lay down an entire base color before I actually start coloring the full piece, is because doing this actually makes using the fill tool work a little better. So I actually add a new layer, clip it to the single color that I just said I was using, and then I add base colors using the fill tool. This is so when I use the fill tool, the base colors can't go outside of the lines. Using the fill tool usually means it won't go outside of the lines, but it can sometimes still glitch and go outside of the lines if they aren't clean or if it just gets confused. And also because if I'm ever using a sketch, that'll most likely be the case, so I'm not taking any chances even with line art. So here's another extra thing I like to do with my base colors. By the way, if you end up actually wanting to use colors that are very much so more closer to your reference instead of whatever extra colors you want to add, then I suggest duplicating the base colors before you edit it. It's also just in case you don't like what you added, so you can just start again. And by the way, this part is optional, but if you want to know how I add this look to my colors, then you might not want to skip this part. So this is kind of how I make my colors more saturated and stuff like that. So yeah. So first I add a new color on a different layer just in case I want to change the hue a bit. And after I'm satisfied with how the colors look with that color, I merge every color into one layer. So when you are doing this, you might want to change the opacity, the filter, the color, the blend mode, whatever. So this part actually does take a little while. Oh, and by the way, this is usually a complementary color just to make everything more cohesive. So let's say I'm drawing a character that's green or something.
Your elemental power is green.
What's that?
Green.
I wouldn't want to use a very red overlay. It would look a little off. You can, by the way, I have done that before. This is just a basic example, but always using a complementary color, it looks better no matter what you try to do, because of color theory, of course. Now that we've got the base colors down, it's time to shade. The way I shade changes sometimes, but I usually use the same brush as what I used for base colors, which is usually felt tip pen and a dip pen, which these are both Ibis Paint default brushes, by the way. For soft edges or soft shading, I also like to use pen fade or an airbrush, which is usually at 60%. And today I will actually be using those two brushes because I do want to do those softer edges and harder edges. And by the way, I always choose out my colors manually. I used to use a multiply layer to shade, but it can make the piece lose contrast and saturation, and my pieces usually are very, very saturated. And it's also very hard to color pick from, and it means you kind of just have to use one color and work in sections if you use a multiply layer. And you also have to kind of be organized to use it, but it's also faster and easier to use. I won't personally be using it, but you can if you want to. I'm kind of unorganized and I never work in one specific section for too long, so I usually just like to shade one color at a time. When I'm shading, sometimes in between of the shadows, I like to use an airbrush at 60%, and then I take the skin tone or the most dominant color in the piece, and I like to lightly brush around where I feel like it's necessary. This is kind of to give a bounce light effect and to give the shading a less harsh edge effect. For highlights, I usually like to draw on the edge of some of my lines, so like on the hair or skin or arm or wherever I think the lighting would be. That's where I usually like to add highlights. The first highlight color is usually just the base color but more saturated and brighter. And then the second color is a bright version of a complementary color for the base color. Then any other highlight color is just whatever I think looks good and really doesn't usually depend on color theory. Now it's time for the part you were waiting for, and I'm sorry I took so long to get to this part, rendering. Part of getting ready to render for me at least is having most of the drawing done. So I've already shaded, I've already added the highlights, I've already basically done everything. The drawings basically could have been done by now, but this is my idea of rendering at least. So now that I've started rendering, this is when I like to start adding the airbrush tool, and I start to lightly draw extra colors in, or I like to shade or add the soft shading. So in some parts on the shading layer, sometimes I add an extra color inside of that to add a bounce light effect there as well. I like to take the shading color and on a new layer I darken it and make it more saturated, and then I draw it on top of it like an outline, almost like there's line art there but there's no line art there. This is to make the shading colors stand out a little more and also not blend in too much with the base colors. So this is kind of the time where I start to color the line art. I usually sometimes color the line art before I even start shading. Sometimes I do it before I even finish with the base colors. But for most of my drawings, I actually color the line art after I'm done with the shading. So I usually take a very saturated version of the shaded color, change the hue a bit, and that's always the line art color I choose for that area. This is also the time I take that exact same color color, and then I slightly use the airbrush tool and go over spots where I think it could be softer. This is also sort of like a bounce light glow effect. I don't really know what to call it. It's kind of random. I don't always do this. So this is when I start adding mid-tone colors, and that's kind of what I call them because they're an in-between of the base color and they're also a more saturated version of the shading color. So I usually do this on the side of the shading, and then on top of the shading or on the outside of the shading I do a very bright version of the base color and the shading color, and I kind of outline it just to make it look a little more saturated than it actually is. So now I also do highlights. This is a different way that I do highlights sometimes, by the way. This is my main way of doing highlights, actually. Most artists add highlights before rendering, but I like to do this after I've merged all of my layers. This is an effect I noticed from the first IDW Sonic cover. I don't really remember who drew it, I apologize for that, but it's kind of my inspiration for my art style. So I usually like to make the highlight a little messy, and I go over my line art. This is usually with kind of like an airbrush tool. I don't really know if it's a fully airbrush tool. I forgot when I drew this, I'm sorry. So this also helps hide shaky lines. After that, I go to liquefy some parts where I find the proportions are slightly off. After I do that, I kind of then start to explore colors. So I duplicate the entire piece, and after I merge all of the extra additional details I did, and then I add a color gradient map, or I just shift around the color hues a bit. And I kind of lower the opacity of this to my liking, and I kind of try to make sure if I like the colors or not. So I actually tend to have a different color variation of all my pieces. So if you look at my most recent Sonic or Knuckles art, you could actually see a different version of the same piece with different colors. Some are more accurate to the original colors that are used from the original artists of the character or thing I'm referencing, and the main version is the variant I have, or the way I like to color them at least. And any extra additional details I don't really think matter, even to my style. It's usually just me fixing mistakes. So now you actually have a fully rendered piece. And if you don't think yours looks done, then that's alright. You can always make extra adjustments. I do that too. Like, when I say I do so many extra adjustments, sometimes I waste 30 minutes on something that nobody would notice, even me. Like, I literally don't remember what I was fixing sometimes. It honestly just takes practice and learning your art style and what you like to do and your preferences and stuff. I myself am still adding and changing things about the way I draw. There's always something new or new technique I added to almost literally every one of my drawings. Like, almost none of my drawings look the same or have any sort of same style. Like, there's always something I feel like people will notice that it's slightly different or something I slightly improved on. But anyways, sorry about like the long ramble. I don't know how organized this video was, but I hope it was still helpful. And actually, if you did find the video helpful, then make sure to leave a like and subscribe. It really helps my channel, and as a small artist, I feel like I'm trying to like grow, but I don't know how. So if you found anything like very confusing, then you can always ask questions in the comment section, or like I said earlier, take notes. Taking notes helps so much. Try to write what you didn't understand and try to rewrite it to yourself in a way you think you'll understand. Even if it's a little off from how I explained it, it's okay. It's your way of learning. Just learn the way you learn. That's kind of what I have to say about that. Anyways, that's the end of the video. Once again, I really hope you enjoyed it, found it helpful, anything of that sort. And make sure to follow my other socials if you want extra information, or if you want to see more of my art. I actually posted my art earlier on there. It will take a while for me to get all of my art on here because I need to make full-length videos or repost videos for my TikTok. So if you want to see the piece earlier or the art you will see in these videos earlier, it will always be on my Instagram before on here. But anyways, that's all. Thank you for watching. Bye!